It is a little bit funky. Anyway, we'll keep going. Hello, everyone. For you who don't know me, my name is Scott Tyndall, co-founder of Fuelin, and one of the performance nutrition coaches. And thank you for joining today.
And if you don't know me by now, I don't know what kind of rock you're hiding under. I'm around all the time, but Elizabeth, another of the performance nutrition coaches here, trying to chime in as much as I can on the app and encourage you guys and talk to you as we go.
Very good. So should I refresh this? It just looks really funky. I don't know. Anyway, it's about talking. It's only the pictures. So we'll go through the athlete questions that have been submitted. Again, I haven't put every single question in there that's been submitted because I think there's a lot of value in just answering live questions as well. Ooh. Okay. So Elizabeth, you'll go.
Yep. All right. I need some ideas for items on the run. Gels, chews, or sports beans. I tend to run into stomach issues if I have too much of anything. Ginny, great question. I think this is something we've all probably dealt with at one time or another. I think it's highly individual as to what's going to work for you. In terms of like low GI distress, I feel like it goes chews, sports beans, gels, and then some kind of liquid. But again, it's very much athlete dependent. I think finding the right chews, some are really chewy and hard to chew as you're going along. I think some of the gels are very easy to go down. I love the endurance tap ones. I know a lot of people like the Morton gels. They say the consistency is very easy. Sports beans, again, that's basically candy or chews. Cara likes the scratch chews. I love the scratch chews. Some people don't like them. I think dried fruit is another option, like regular jelly beans. If you don't want to pay the price for sports beans, there was a study that showed that they had exactly the same results. They were just sugary. So it is almost Easter. You can get plenty of jelly beans or like those little candy, basically just sugar, eggs and those kinds of things. Other options, some people can actually chew bars on a run. They just break them into smaller pieces. So very tiny bites of different bars. And then, I've seen people make their own, which we have a question about, a recipe for bars or balls. They've made their own and then utilized them. I've had athletes make their own concoctions of like chia pudding and then putting it in a Ziploc baggie and making their own gels. It's really, I would look at your stomach issues and do two things. Are they happening because of what you're eating, or are they happening because you might be eating it too fast or in like a larger quantity than your gut is ready for? And are you taking any fluids in with those? Because that can help as well. Gels are designed to be taken with fluid, and a lot of times athletes just suck them down and then end up getting stomach issues. So timing, how much you're taking, if you're taking them with any water. And as Scott has talked about continually, our guts are trainable. So if you can get past that most uncomfortable point and start to learn and train your gut to be better about digesting while you're running, you'll probably see some improvements.
Yeah, I think you've answered that really well, Elizabeth. I think the main thing here, Jenny, is that maybe it's the gels you're choosing or the chews. So if you are coming into issues with those gels or chews, then maybe look at some of the other products that maybe you haven't tried, which Elizabeth mentioned. I think the top three for me would probably be the Precision Hydration Gel, because it's very neutral, gives you 30 grams of carbs in glucose fructose. The Morton Gel is just very easy, and it was also supplied on Ironman courses, which makes it even better to practice with. And then I think the Endurance Tap is really, really good. The other one that's come on recently is Never Second, and that seems to be very well tolerated and pretty easy to go down as well. But I think the other thing that Elizabeth really hinted at is how often are you doing this, and are you actually practicing this at the appropriate intensity sessions as well, because you may not be needing gels, chews, sports beans and that if it is a lower intensity Z2 session, and you may be better off with whole food options at that point in time. Okay, I'll do the next one. Should I be following the calories provided by MyFitnessPal? I know that Fuelin does not include session calories in the daily amounts recommended. Please explain it again, Daryl. So Daryl's question was actually a full paragraph. It was like an essay, but I didn't want to put the whole thing in here. So effectively what Daryl's asking is, he actually wears his chest strap all day, he was explaining. And so he's probably very dialed in as to what he believes is his caloric expenditure. Now, most people won't be wearing a chest strap all day. I will say that the caloric expenditure given by some of these wearables is can be somewhere between 15 and 35% above what is actually happening. So I think that's the first thing to take into account. The way in which we deliver the macros, so we get you focusing on your out of session macros. So whatever we're telling you to hit, certainly aim to hit that amount of protein, fat, and carbohydrates in line, because that's going to be based on what your purpose is, whether that's a improvement in body composition, losing weight, or if it's performance. Now, we will be recommending appropriate amounts of calories or fuel during sessions that require them. So as you can see on the left there, although it is a little bit fuzzy, this individual had a 2-hour ride and he's being told to hit, somewhere between 90 and 120 grams of carbs per hour, anywhere up to 480 calories with potentially an extra 90 calories per hour in through some fat and some protein. So, all up, that's what, 570 calories an hour. Yes, it's probably going to be a little bit less than what you're probably expending, but you're certainly not going to be running out of energy. So I think if you can delineate between what we're providing in that out of session fuel to when we are saying just hit the numbers and you'll feel really good and don't worry about tracking that, I think mentally it also provides you with a little bit of relief to say, you know what, I trust the program. They're telling me I need a lot of fuel in this session, or I don't need a lot of fuel. That's fine. I'm just going to do that and get on with it. And when we see athletes do that consistently and they have adherence to that type of program, we see really good results. Daryl, I don't know if you're on the call. Does that answer your question? I hope so. We'll keep going. Elizabeth, your go. Oh, no, it's my go. Sorry. Why do some of the items I track in MyFitnessPal show up differently in Fuelin? So the way we provide the caloric amounts in MyFitnessPal is based on the macros that are being provided, i.e. protein, carbohydrates, and fat. Now, in MyFitnessPal, the caloric amount doesn't always add up to what the macros are. So there is this funny thing, I think, in America where they call them, what do they call them? It's something to do with the carbohydrates. What do they call them? Net carbs. So they don't count fiber or something like that towards energy, because the digestive process takes a little bit more energy to break down carbohydrates. I'm like, you're still eating energy, guys. So often the caloric amount in MyFitnessPal isn't actually accurate. And so we actually adjust on our end. So you might see that our amount is either a little bit higher or a little bit lower, depending on what the actual macros are for protein, fat, and carb. So hopefully that explains that. It's a very odd thing. I think it was created in America, this whole net carb notion. And I think it's to make, honestly, it's to make nutritional information panels on the back of foods look way better than what they are. So just keep that in mind. Carbs are carbs, guys. Like, I mean, I know carbs aren't carbs, but like in the end, it's 4 calories per gram of carbohydrate. And yes, you could get into the micro details around like fiber and how it's broken down by the gut and how different amounts of energy are extracted. And some people genetically can extract more energy from certain foods, but you're picking flies off horse shit there. I'm sorry. So, we can just move on. Okay.
All right.
That's a very Australian saying. So
that's excellent. It's absolutely excellent. If someone's writing down quotes of the day, that should be it. Do you have any recipes for bars or balls with recommended macro ratios?
Ooh, glad you asked.
Yeah. So here we have a couple recipes for you. The app does have recipes. You can use other sources. So Alan Lim's, his Feed Zone Portables book, the Eat Fast, Run Slow has some. Multiple athletes have created their own. So you have a wealth of resources. The idea here, so the Alan Lim's rice cakes, he does sticky rice, and then obviously is as the base, and then you can either add
Whatever you like.
a host. You get pretty much anything that you want. If you want it sweet, you can go the date, almonds, brown sugar, cinnamon route. If you want like honey banana, obviously, he has one that has Parmesan cheese, bacon, and scrambled eggs in it. If you want something more savory, the idea is, and what I find if I'm on the rare occasion that I take the time to make my own, is that I pick the ingredients either that I have in the pantry that I would like to use up, or I know what I like when I'm out on certain longer rides. In the winter, extra sweet is nice. In the summer, in the heat, like I wouldn't eat a date, almond, honey banana. Like it's too sweet when it's too hot. So adjust temperature, adjust taste preference, and use what you have. And remember, you can store in the fridge, store in the freezer, but they are not like, I made the mistake once of thinking they'd be good for like a week sitting out on the counter, and it's not. It's fresh. They're not regular bars, so you have to remember to refrigerate or freeze them. And one of the nice things I like about balls, and we'll put this in I'll put a couple recipes in the newsletter following up with this, is that's where I add protein powder. And that's where you can make these little protein bites and have the snack. If you're trying to look for getting in, like Scott always says, like fortify your food, fortify your bars or your snacks. And it's really easy to make in the little balls. And, I've put them in my niece's school lunches. So you can, they're family friendly, and you can use pretty much any ingredients that you want.
And just to clarify on that, she's not putting protein powder in these rice cakes. She was talking about, Elizabeth's talking about some protein balls and bars. So does everyone have this book, this Feed Zone Portables? It's such a good book. Like, honestly, just get it on Kindle, and then you just use the recipes in it. To be honest, I didn't read the whole book. I just looked through the recipes, and I was like, it's a great resource. Like, fair play to Alan Lim and the team that wrote the book. I think it's a really great resource. On Kindle, it's fantastic. You can just take the recipes and go. The basic, it makes 12 to 15. The per cake I based on making 15 rice cakes. Okay. And as Elizabeth said, some of them are much higher in carbohydrates than some of the others, which are higher in protein and fat. So depending on the ingredients, obviously, is what's going to make a difference to the macro breakdown. And the cool thing is, in the back of the book, in appendix, I think it's appendix A, it's got a table with all the macros broken down for each of the recipes. So you can just look through the back of the book and just go, oh, yep. Just keep in mind it's for the whole batch, because it will say something like 544 grams of carbs. It's not per cake, okay? It's it's not per cake. It's for the entire recipe. So you got to divide it by how many balls or cakes you're going to make. But it's very good. Sarah Piano put me onto this years and years ago when I was working with her. She actually used to have at least 2 of these during her racing, which I was always like, really? You want to have your own stuff? But she loved it, and it helped. And I think she had 3 of these when she raced Brazil, and obviously smashed the hell out of that race. So it is possible to eat real food, and these, if you want to, in races. It's obviously not my preference because you've got to make it and do that. But she used to also take a whole kitchen with her when she traveled. She would take a rice cooker. She would do that sort of stuff. Now, that's not for every athlete. I get it. So just keep in mind, if you are going to practice these in race training sessions that are race pace and you plan on making these, then you need to be able to make them when you go to the race you're going to. And that's an extra bit of kit that you're going to have to pack, like a small rice cooker. You're going to have to take some rice. You would have to take your ingredients, all that. So just factor that in. I think for training and stuff like that, fantastic. If you just want to practice where you don't want to eat gels or blocks and you still want to take in a large amount of carbs, but just know that if it's not going to be something you're going to actually race with, then don't always use them in training sessions where you're practicing race nutrition. Okay.
All right. What is your take on taking BCAAs during a workout? Christoph's question. Boy, if I had $1 for every time someone asked me this question. I'm going to start by saying more research is needed because it's not.
Just explain what BCAAs are, maybe. That would be a good one.
So branched chain amino acids. It's the 3: leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And they provide the building blocks basically for making new proteins. So following exercise, BCAAs, primarily leucine, stimulate that mTOR pathway, which is the pathway that turns on MPS. So basically, kind of making and creating muscle, if you will. And again, that's a simplified version. BCAAs are kind of the 3 common areas that we see them recommended or utilized is for kind of strength muscle gain, actually building muscle, as an ergogenic aid. So in relieving muscle soreness and or prolonging endurance exercise. And then nowadays we see it a lot as an ingredient in pre-workouts. So kind of those 4 areas. In terms of gaining muscle. So the mechanism, like the metabolic mechanism for muscle growth is kind of what we call muscle protein balance. Basically, you want to be making more protein than you're breaking down. So what we've seen is that, and again, most of these studies are done in young, healthy males. So there could be potentially different results in different age groups that might be missing some branched chain amino acids. So vegan athletes are kind of a different group, older masters athletes. But what we've seen is, yes, BCAAs can help with muscle protein synthesis, but you get a better response if you eat a protein source that has all of the essential amino acids. So if you're, instead of taking your BCAAs, go have your breakfast or go have your dinner with chicken, like the full essential amino acid profile will give you a better response. Now, if you don't have access to it, if you're not going to be eating for a while, some argue that it might be better than nothing. But the muscle growth factor, it's not going to make your muscles grow big on your own. If you're looking at it to relieve muscle soreness, some of the studies have shown, yes, that it does alleviate some muscle soreness. The idea is that it acts as like a kind of pH buffer, reducing that soreness. But even when that soreness was reduced, it doesn't mean that there was less muscle fatigue. So while you might potentially have less soreness, it doesn't mean that you're going to perform better. Like your muscles don't have more energy. They just might not feel as bad, which is why they like to use it in a pre-workout, because that might help you, the better you feel, the more likely you might be to finish that session. And then kind of that third area where endurance is it going to help with endurance activity? So after 90 minutes, the glycogen that's stored in our liver starts to get mobilized. And when in the studies, when BCAAs were ingested, that it moves to the muscle and it's oxidized to help provide additional energy. So potentially, the helping prolong physical performance and keep it from deteriorating, there's that potential there, because that's usually when we get tired is because we have muscle glycogen depletion. However, if you're consuming carbohydrates and supplying your body with the fuel that it needs, you could alleviate that degradation on its own. So again, the evidence supporting it is we need to do more studies because it's not confirmed in all. It's a buzzword, but I'm going to say I've had athletes that swear by it, say they feel better with it, and kind of like any placebo, if you feel like you're performing better by taking it and you're working out better and you see it, then by all means take it, but you certainly don't. It's not the missing key to your success as an endurance athlete.
Thanks, A. The only thing, and I think it was really good you touched on the duration of the session, and maybe what should have been clarified by Christoph, or maybe what we should have clarified in the question is what type of workout is he actually referring to? Because I think more often than not, what you see is people in the gym with a 45-minute to 60-minute weight session sipping on BCAAs because there was this notion that it will help trigger or improve muscle protein synthesis. I think what we're seeing from a lot of literature is actually that's not necessarily the case. And as you highlighted, consumption of essential amino acids or EAAs is probably going to have a better impact on that mTOR and whatnot. But the reality is for a 45 to 60-minute session, you may have eaten a piece of toast beforehand, which may have had 3 or 4 grams of protein in it. And then you're going to be eating a meal afterwards, which potentially contains 40 to anywhere from 30 to 50 grams of protein, which will certainly, if you're eating a mixed meal, will contain at least 3.2 grams of leucine, unless you're a vegan and maybe you need to fortify your food, but that's going to be enough. I think for an endurance athlete, potentially with this over 90 minutes, I have read some research which looks at improving concentration and improving mental acuity. And that's where BCAAs or EAAs could potentially be beneficial. But again, if you're taking on a bar every 60 minutes in these really long sessions, you're probably getting about 8 or 9 grams of protein anyway, which will contain all these essential amino acids. And therefore, it's probably not much different. So, yeah, I'd probably save you money. That's what I would say. Bigger fish to fry, bro.
And I'm saying this as someone that years ago, when I can't even remember his name right now, was promoting BCAAs, like the body health guy, I don't remember his name, and was like, oh, take it exactly 27 minutes on an empty stomach before you start exercise, or, after you finish exercising, and then don't eat for an additional whatever afterwards. And it's like I understand the hype and the way that they can use studies to kind of lure you in.
Well, it's all based on a clinical controlled study where they provided them with was either BCAAs versus a control of a placebo, and they don't take into account what would normally be in a real life scenario, which would be, some eggs or some oatmeal or something like that afterwards. And I think if you compared that with then the ingestion of BCAAs, I think you'd probably see there'd be no difference, or potentially the real food would come out on top. And I haven't seen any studies that actually do that. And certainly if someone's listening and wants to highlight those studies to me and prove me wrong, then happy to,
please
call it.
All right,
Let's
Patrick,
go.
is it okay to listen to hunger cues on rest easier days? Sometimes tough to decipher if my body is needing to refuel from a good block of training or just boredom with reduced training load. Patrick, again, I think I had this actually just this week. One of my athletes asked. Part of being in Fuelin is trusting the process that Scott and I are making sure that we're meeting your daily caloric needs. So if your training is accurate and your zones are accurate and the times and everything is updated, then on our end, we have gone through that and, at least to the best of our ability, made sure that your body has enough on board to help you recover. Now, if you're not eating all that we're suggesting, or if your training zones are off or you're training harder, that could add some potential hunger. If you didn't get enough sleep, that could be where that hunger cue is coming from. If you, you know, weren't meeting some of the macros, or your caloric intake was off. So always looking at where that hunger is coming from. And as we all know, yes, so when you are less busy and you're training less, and have a lighter training load, we are hungrier, we are sitting around, it's natural to grab food. So I would recommend first making sure, and I know that you've heard this before, but there's a reason for it, making sure that you're consuming enough fluids throughout the day. Making sure that on your rest week, I always say, whatever time you're getting back from training, so if it's 2 hours less, make sure you're sleeping 2 hours more. Like, use that to actually rest and allow your body to heal and recover and rebuild. And then look at what you're eating. Did you eat less the day before? Are you eating enough? Are you meeting those? And then, yes, if you are starving, we certainly don't want you to be starving, but look at, have you consumed your protein for the day? Because that's where a lot of that satiety comes in. And are you relying, on your easier days? Are you drinking more coffee and then having that rise and then crash? What are some of those outside sources that might be leading to the hunger cues? And then go about making smart choices on the foods that you are eating and see how you're feeling.
Yeah. And Patrick, I think you're on this call, so feel free to speak up if you want to give some insight. The thing I will add to this, because I had a patient, I had an athlete. Sorry, that's my physio desk. I had an athlete yesterday who was actually, and it really caught me off guard. Actually, he sort of said, "Look, I'm starving. I'm really hungry. I haven't been able to train." And I was like, "Shit, what's going on?" What we realized, and this is something really important for athletes on the program, is make sure you look at what your athlete profile is saying, because what he's in the middle of the season training hard and trying to perform, yet in his profile, he was off season, he was improving body composition and in an aggressive weight loss. So he hadn't changed his profile, yet his training had significantly increased and the intensity increased. And obviously we're not then supplying the amount of fuel required for what his training was based on the purpose that he had put in. So there are some times where, yes, we could get it wrong based on the information that we're being supplied. So we are, again, working on a system whereby we might just bug you a little bit and just maybe nudge you to say, is your profile correct? And you can just either swipe it away or actually go, oh shit, I need to check. So that is really important. The other thing I realized with that athlete as well is that the Z scores and the time of day were not being input into his program weekly, which therefore was messing up all his session timings and meal timings around that, which could also significantly impact his hunger, because all the sessions were just being put in the morning and then all these meals afterwards. So if you have multiple sessions in a day, make sure that the time of day is input correctly in your training plan so that we can position meals around that. And that is really important. Okay. Patrick, did you want to add anything? If it is the Patrick that asked the question. You're on mute, by the way, if you do. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay. I am new to triathlon and endurance sports in general. As an intermittent faster, I always did my workouts without breakfast. I've since learned fueling for workouts is important. Is my breakfast giving me energy for my 1 to 2 hour workout? Or am I tapping into what I ate last night? Is breakfast replenishing me after my workout? This is such a cool question, actually, and I don't know if it was meant to be as cool as it was, but so there's a couple of things here. So, and this is based on some recent research. So say you go to bed at 6 or 7 o'clock, or maybe you eat your last meal at 6 or 7 o'clock and you go to bed. Now, assume an hour after that, you're hour to 2 hours, you're then in a fasted, you're going fasted. So you could then be fasting for, 8 to 10 hours or whatever before your next session, maybe not that long. Now, if you ate your meal, say 1 to 2 hours before that session in the morning, then that meal will certainly be supplying you with energy through, it will have been digested and tapping into that. However, if you ate that meal, say 10 to 20 minutes before that session, then the likelihood is no, it probably won't really kick in maybe until an hour and a half into that workout. So sort of theoretically, you're still in a fasted state, but you are training your gut to cope with potentially a higher volume of food. So there are a couple of little cool sort of interesting things here. So, for those individuals who, want to, technically do fasted training, they could eat their meal very close to, especially if it's a little bit more complex, like with some protein, fat, and carbohydrates, say overnight oats. You could eat it very close to the start of that training session, and therefore the first at least 60 minutes of that session could technically be considered fasting. Would that potentially, it could assist with fat oxidation, it could assist with, improving that sort of respiratory quotient, whatnot. So it is something to think about. Obviously, if you consume a gel just before that, then, you're probably going to tap into your carbohydrates quicker. You will obviously be releasing fructose from the liver, and that will be converted to glucose. So if you're wearing a blood glucose monitor, you'll probably see a spike in your blood sugars anyway, because of the release of the fructose from the liver. So depending on the intensity of the session. So it is kind of cool. But certainly if you eat your meal 1 to 2 hours before that session, then you would certainly be tapping into that. And then the meal afterwards would be therefore replenishing you after the workout. Elizabeth, do you want to add anything to that? I don't know if hopefully I answered that correctly. It's super cool though, because it is like, you can, even if you're eating a meal before a session, you can manipulate how that meal actually impacts that session, which I think is really cool. Like from the brain perspective, from like, I was listening to, what's his name? Andy Galpin on the Huberman lab the other day. And he was talking about like, it was super interesting. And a lot of the things he said aligned with what we believe in and what we do with Fuelin. But something that did catch my attention, he was like, we was talking about hydration. He was like, oh, don't drink lots of fluid before you do your session because you're going to have it sloshing around in your stomach. And I'm like, well, if you want to practice like, what it feels like to have a lot of stuff floating around your stomach, then certainly consuming 500 to 1,000 mils of fluid prior to a session, jumping on the bike and just being really full, actually there are benefits to that in terms of training your brain to cope with that. The more you do that, the more accustomed you come to that, and actually the less sort of irritation you can get. So there is always, for every for every action, there's a reaction somewhere in there within nutrition. So just things to think about.
Yeah. So I know you're training for a 70.3. Have you do you ever stop to think about your breakfast preset? Like, oh, I could manipulate this to have it earlier rather than later.
Yeah, I tend to do the later because I don't like getting up early. So I tend to eat everything as I'm on the warm up. So I'll eat my oats as I'm warming up. And I'm like, you know what? This is certainly not going to be helping me right now, but it will certainly help me afterwards. But I do a lot of that. Before swimming this morning, I just had 2 bananas, which was about 30. It was a yellow snack. I had them as I was running out the door, and I certainly didn't feel great for the first probably 5 or 6 laps of the session, and then it sort of all started happening, kicking in. But I'm a terrible swimmer, so anyway, we don't need to talk about that. Okay. As most of you know, there is the pilot program. For those of you who aren't on Fuelin or are joining us today who aren't part of Fuelin, there is this pilot program, which, monthly it is $39 a month, but if you do join on an annual basis, it is $29 a month. And it's pretty good value. It's sort of in line with the cost of things like Training Peaks, Today's Plan, Final Surge. And hopefully it's enticing and helpful to every athlete out there. At the end of this session, we're not finishing the session, but at the end of the session, there will be a questionnaire where you can obviously complete and just let us know your thoughts on the session. But what I would like to do is now just open it up to any questions you may have that haven't been submitted or we didn't cover today. Brian, actually, you had a question, Brian. I saw it there.
Yeah, it's what is your opinion of beets and beet powder?
Cool. So, Brian, I wrote an article about this for Triathlete last year. I put it on in one of the newsletters, and you can just search in Triathlete magazine about beets and beet powder. Look, nitrates are great from a health perspective. Nitrates can improve blood pressure, certainly advantageous for cardiovascular performance. I think they've also been shown to help with sort of blood glucose control. I think from an athletic standpoint, yeah, they can help. They can improve time trial performance. They can improve time to exhaustion. You need around, I think it's 400 milligrams of dietary nitrates a day to see this positive improvement. 400 milligrams of dietary nitrates consumed by beets would be about 2.5 kilos of beets per day. I don't know about you, but I don't like eating that many beets. I think consumption of beets in your daily diet is really good. You can get some really good carbohydrates. You can get some fiber. I think adding in any of those types of food products into your daily diet when it's required is really good and advantageous. I think if you're going to try the beet supplements, in particular nitrates, dietary nitrates, Beat It is probably the shot that I would recommend. I think it's the most widely used. It's Inform Sport compared to all the other products on there, which have wildly varying degrees of amounts of dietary nitrates in them. The Beat It consistently has that 400 milligram dose. If you've ever drunk, has anyone ever drunk the Beat It shots? Has anyone had them? They're certainly an acquired taste. It was a real shame when we were at True Protein. We made a product called Beat It, and it had it was so delicious. It had so the nitrates supplied, and it had a cherry extract in it. But unfortunately, it contained a product in it which is a naturally occurring product called hegenomine, and hegenomine is actually a banned substance. But weirdly enough, hegenomine comes from beets. So it's like, well, how do you have a beet product that isn't a banned product? And it's because our product was in a powder format, and it just went over the amounts of hegenomine that is legal. But if it was in a liquid form, which is what Beat It is in, it probably wouldn't have tested positive. So if you are taking a nitrate supplement and it's in powdered form, and it's not tested for banned substances, just be very aware that it could contain this hegenomine, and that could put you potentially at risk of testing inadvertently positive for a banned substance. It's been banned by WADA for the last, I think, 12 or 24 months. Not nitrates, the hegenomine, because it's a beta blocker. It helps with slowing down heart rate and increasing VO2 max, which is pretty much what every athlete wants. So it was actually remarkable when you were on this product. You were like, God, it tastes good. And then I was like, geez, my heart rate's dropping like overnight. And then I felt amazing sort of running. And I was like, that must be the supplement. So yeah, beets are good. Take them. Eat beets, Brian. And, if you've got blood pressure issues, cardiovascular sort of concerns, things like that, I'd certainly recommend increasing your dietary nitrates. You can have a look online for that article as well.
Scott, can you convince them to bring it back for those of us that don't mind consuming the banned substance?
Well, that's what I actually said I remember speaking to the CEO and the CFO about this, and I was like, who cares? Like, there's so many athletes out there who don't care about getting a banned substance that's naturally occurring. I was like, probably everyone would buy it. Everyone would probably go through the roof and buy it because it tasted so good, and it actually certainly improved performance. But I mean, the company stands by it. Was true.
Yeah,
They're
I
like,
get it.
beat through, and it didn't really fit with their branding and stuff. But yeah, maybe Fuelin will bring out.
There you go.
Doesn't really fit with us too. So cool. And Cara, yeah, I think your point about the scratch chews, scratch chews are used by quite a lot of athletes. I think the issue, like just on the bike, like there's so many. What's a packet contain? It's like 20 grams of carbs, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's
pretty low,
140
isn't it?
calories. Yeah. I use it on the run. I don't use it on the bike. I can do gels on the bike, but gels on the run will mess my stomach up.
Really? What gels?
Even
Scratch gel?
Morton. I've done Morton. Yeah.
Have you done like the endurance tap or the precision gels? I would definitely give them a go. The endurance tap, you won't even notice. It just goes straight
I
down.
can attest. I hate gels, and endurance tap and precision both work really well for me. I actually like them.
And despite Morton, I know Morton's very good and like a lot of athletes use it, but I find the consistency absolutely distressing. So yeah, I just don't really like the Morton gels, and they don't necessarily sit that well with me. So I think it's just a really good point that despite what you might read on social media about one product being amazing for everyone, it's not always the case. So I think absolutely, look, if you can handle the scratch chews and eat, I guess you just tip the whole packet in your mouth and chew them down. But yeah, I prefer gels on the run. I prefer blocks and chews and things like that, and some liquids on the bike. Any other questions?
I actually have a question.
Yeah.
Have you all thought about, and maybe you do this as like a woman who's still cycling, do you look at tweaking nutrition based on like where I would be in my cycle? I know there's no like input in the app, but is that something that you're looking at like doing down the road? And what's kind of your philosophy that way?
I'll put my 2 cents in here and then Elizabeth can. I'm obviously not a female, so I'm just going to answer based on what we see in the science. If you want that to occur, my position on this is it's the coach's responsibility to put in the training appropriate to your cycle. So all the evidence is around women do better with higher intensity stuff, training and whatnot in the first half of their cycle. In the second half of their cycle, they're not so good in the luteal phase. So if your coach is still putting in higher intensity training in that luteal phase, but we give you do better with fat, it's going to be a disaster.
Sure.
So nutrition should support the training, not nutrition dictating the training. So if you want to go down that route with, I don't know, are you a coach or not?
No, I'm an athlete, but I'm like a nerd. So I, follow Stacey Sims, and I'm training for an Ironman right now too. So it's like there's only so much you can tweak realistically with
correct. And when you look at the research, I'm sorry, I think Stacey's done an amazing job for raising awareness that women aren't small men and all this. I'm just going to say, when you read the research, there's no difference. Performance outcomes are the same, whether you do, you tweak your nutrition or you tweak your training based on the menstrual cycle. Doesn't seem to be that much evidence to support it. So I think the theory behind it makes sense. But at this point in time, I haven't seen convincing evidence to warrant necessary coaches to do it, because I think it's quite difficult, as you said, to implement. And we used to, I did it with Sarah when we first were doing all of this, when I with Sarah Piano, we used to try and manipulate the diet around her cycle. It just didn't work. It was too much hassle for her to do it, and she didn't see the performance outcomes. So I think we are there to support whatever training you're doing. And if your coach is giving you higher intensity sessions, then our view is, based on the research, that you're going to need carbohydrates at that point in time, and lots of them. But certainly if your coach then did provide lower intensity sessions in the back half of the month, then yes, it would all be Z1, Z2 sessions, and you're going to get higher amounts of fat and lower amounts of carbs. So
sure,
we certainly can work with that if that's what your coach or any female coach out there is programming. I don't want to be too controversial. I'm probably way too controversial there.
Absolutely.
I'll lock down in social media now.
No, this is not because we are friends and coworkers. everything that you said is exactly what the research shows, what I agree with, and this is the hill that I will die on. It drives me, I can be a little more impassioned about this. It drives me crazy, the amount of people that like feel and believe that there's this huge difference in their cycle and how they like have to completely change every bit of food that they're eating. And so it matters with your training, and then your food matters based on supporting your training. However, I will say, if we took all the women on this call and asked like our symptoms, our cycle, how we feel at different times, we would probably have entirely different answers. How women feel throughout the month is so varied and different. I do believe in supporting the athletes, which is why I love, when we have one-on-one discussions with athletes, a lot of them will say, I have a very heavy cycle and my energy is this. And it's like, okay, then nutritionally, let's look at what we can do for you personally during this time. Or some have horrible cramps, or some aren't sleeping. And so then there are other alternatives. Do I encourage you to have extra omega-3 supplementation? Do I encourage you to have tart cherry juice at night? But that's more treating the symptoms around your cycle, as opposed to a standard cut and dry answer. You need more carbohydrates during this. You need more protein during that. It's like nutritionally, if you are meeting your needs based on your training, then you're covered. And then it's just looking at those individualized, personalized experiences with your cycle that you want to address nutritionally.
Yeah.
There you have it. That's you can quote me. And I too do like Stacy Sims and admire the work. But there's, all of the studies show that it's completely inconclusive. More studies necessary. I welcome those. And I think probably the only reason, to be fair, that we talk about it as much as we do is because of the work that Stacy has done. Like, she has changed the course of research, and I respect and admire that entirely.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is a good question. It always stimulates. I always think of like, I don't know, like, and then there's the men on the other side, like when you start talking menopause and stuff like that, and I'm always like, oh, what about the older men? They need some help too. Maybe they're just got to, I don't know, maybe they know, or they think they know. Maybe they're men and just don't ask any questions. So maybe it's that.
And there is a whole school of thought. I read an article about male changes in male hormones. Like, they have apparently now it's cool for you men to have a cycle and go through different times where performance.
I know Bob's got a cycle. He's always at me a day of the month. So cool. Lexi or Heather, did you have any questions? Or Noah, Bob, anyone have any questions? It's all good. Everyone happy with the new update, the individual macros in the meals? Has everyone got that? Has everyone updated their app so that in every meal you should see the protein, fat, and carb targets for those individual meals? You should have that now.
I find.
One thing we are going to send out as well, we will send out a message to everyone who's on Training Peaks. If you are on Training Peaks, please go to the athlete section in your app, hit the top right-hand spoke wheel, and then go down to update training program integration. Tap on that, tap on Training Peaks, log in, and then confirm the integration. The reason we do that, there was a bug that was picked up that recently happened that was wiping some structured workout information from Training Peaks when athletes were updating from Fuelin. It was something that unfortunately happened and was picked up by us and Training Peaks. And we apologize profusely to the athletes who were impacted by erasing some of their information. Hopefully it didn't impact too much. But if you update that training integration, and you confirm that, then everything will be sorted from now on. Apart from that, I don't think there's anything else to cover, unless anyone's got any questions.
I have a question, Scott.
Yeah.
Curious, like I have a 3-hour bike ride on Saturday, and I noticed the nutrition is a little bit different. It says after 60 minutes, target 30 grams of carbs and 30 grams of fat per hour. Is that for fat, to increase my fat metabolism, or?
It's a zone 2,
Yeah,
right?
because I've noticed the other ones were higher carbs intake.
If it was a zone
No?
3, if it was zone 3 or above, it would be higher carb. But because it's zone 1 or zone 2, it's going to be lower carb, just getting calories in, and we'll be using a little bit more fat. Just because the intensity of the session doesn't require you to use huge amounts of carbs. But we still want to keep the calories up for the session.
Oh, okay, I think I did a zone 3 the other day. That's why. Okay, I was just okay. I get it.
Yep, that's cool.
Thank
It's
you.
a good question. Like that's what's going to dictate what type of fuel you're given.
So how often should I bump it to zone 3 to practice race nutrition? I know you've talked about practicing race nutrition, but like one Saturday
When's your
out of
next race?
4.
Yeah. I mean,
got
you're
time.
4 months out. You're 4 months out. Look, I think if your coach is giving you lower intensity, that lower intensity session at this point in time, and it's a long, what is it, 3.5 hours? Do what your coach is saying, where you're fueling yourself appropriately. Like you're still taking in anywhere up to just under 400 calories an hour in this lower intensity if you're hitting those targets. So you're certainly not going to be under fueling. You're just working the lower intensity, which is what your coach wants you to do.
Okay. Thank you.
You got time, but yeah, reach out like closer to the time. It's like one of those questions, like how long is a piece of string? We don't know exactly how many times you need to practice race fueling. I think what it comes down to, you as the athlete being very, very comfortable with, can you get the amounts of carbohydrates in that are going to be appropriate to the speed at which you want to go, and with the products that you can tolerate and practically get them in. So are they, like Cara was saying, is it scratch chews with a bottle of Morton drink mix with a picky bar? Is that what you're doing? And is that what you're consistently doing? And is that what you plan on doing in a race? If you can do that consistently in those zone 3 sessions and feel really good, come out of it, power, speed, heart rate, everything is wonderful, and you don't get any GI complaints and you're hitting all those numbers, then, you do it as you need to based on the training getting given. But if you're struggling with GI issues, you're struggling with what products to consume, how to get them in, then you probably need to continue practicing that at a slightly higher frequency. That's how I'd be approaching it.
Yeah, no, so far so good. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, you're doing well, so it's cool. Thank you. Okay. Well, if no one's got any more questions. Hello, Kathleen. I haven't said hello. If no one's got any other questions, we'll sign off. But thank you, everyone. Thanks for all the questions as well. And I will say good afternoon or good morning, and you guys a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, thanks.